Chapter 15 of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Piotr. Theatrical Dressing-Rooms. After ascending long flights of stone stairs, traversing dreary passages with whitewashed walls, and doors on either side marked 1, 2, or 3, we tap for admission to a dressing-room. Where is the fairy pathway? Where the beauty? Ah, where? That long white corridor resembles some passage in a prison, and the little chambers leading off it are not very different in appearance from well-kept convict cells, yet this is the home of our actors or actresses for many hours each day. In some country theatres the dressing-rooms are still disgraceful, and the sanitary arrangements worse. Even in London it is only the stars who have an apartment to themselves. At such an excellently conducted theatre as the Haymarket, Miss Winifred Emery has to mount long flights between every act. Suppose she has to change her costume 4 times in the play, she must ascend those stone stairs 5 times in the course of each evening, or in other words walk up 250 steps in addition to the fatigue of acting and the worry of quick changing. While on matinée days this exertion is doubled. She is a leading lady, she has a charming little room when she reaches it, and the excitement, the applause, and the pay of a striking part to cheer her. But think of the sufferers who have the stairs without the redeeming features. An actress once told me she walked or ran up 800 steps every night during her performance. While speaking of dressing rooms, I recall a visit I paid to Miss Geneviève Ward at the Haymarket during the run of Castle in 1902. It was a matinée, and, wanting to ask that delightful woman and great actress a question, I ventured to the stage door and sent up my card. "Miss Ward is on the stage, but I will give it to her when she comes off in 4 minutes," said the stage door keeper. Accordingly I waited near his room. The allotted time went by. It is known in a theatre exactly how long each scene will take, and at the expiration of the 4 minutes Miss Ward's dresser came to bid me follow her up to the ladies' room. The dresser was a nice, complacent looking woman, l'âge ordinaire, as the French would say, arrayed in a black dress and big white apron. Miss Ward had ascended before us, and was already seated on her little sofa. "Delighted to see you, my dear," she exclaimed. "I have 3/4 of an hour's wait, so I hope you will stay to cheer me up." How lovely she looked! Her own white hair was covered by a still whiter front wig, while added colour had given youth to her face, and the darkened eyelids made those wondrous grey orbs of hers even more striking. "Why, you look about 35," I exclaimed, "and a veritable grande dame." "It is all the wimple," she said. "And what may that be?" "Why, this little velvet string arrangement from my bonnet, with the bow under my chin. When you get old, my dear, you must wear a wimple too. It holds back those double, treble, and quadruple chins that are so annoying, and restores youth. Mais voilà!" Miss Ward was first initiated into the mysteries and joys of a wimple when about to play in Becket at the Lyceum. While we chatted she took up her knitting, being as untiring in that line as Mrs. Kendall. Miss Ward was busy making bonnets for hospital children, and during all those long hours she waited in her dressing room, this indefatigable woman knitted for the poor. After about half an hour her dresser returned and said: "It is time for you to dress, madame." "Shall I leave?" I asked. "Certainly not. There is plenty of room for us all." And in a moment the knitting was put aside, and her elaborate blue silk garment taken off and hung on a peg between white sheets. Rapidly Miss Ward transformed herself into a sorrowing mother. A black skirt, a long black coat, and bonnet were placed in readiness, when lo! the dresser, having turned everything over, exclaimed: "I cannot see your black bodice." Miss Ward looked perturbed. "I do believe I have left it at home. I went back in it last night, if you remember, because I was lazy, and forgot all about it. Never mind, no one will see the bodice is missing when I put on my cloak, if I fasten it tied up, and I must just melt inside its folds." But when the cloak was fastened there still appeared a decidedly décolleté neck. Time was pressing, the call boy might arrive at any moment. Miss Ward seized a black silk stocking, which she twirled round her neck, secured it with a jet brooch, powdered her face to make it look more doleful, and was ready in her garb of woe ere the boy knocked. Then we went down together. These theatrical dressers become wonderfully expert. I have seen an actress come off the stage after a big scene quite exhausted, and yet only have a few minutes before the next act. She stood in the middle of her dressing room while we talked, and at once her attendants set to work. The great lady remained like a block. Quickly the dresser undid her neckband, and unhooked the bodice after removing the lace, took away the folded waistband, slipped off the skirt, and in a twinkling the long ball dress was over the actress's head and being fastened behind. Her arms were slipped into the low bodice, and while she arranged the jewels or her corsage, the dresser was doing her up at the back. Down sat the actress in a chair placed for her, and while she rouged more strongly to suit the gaiety of the scene, the dresser was putting feathers and ornaments into her hair, pinning a couple of little curls to her wig to hang down her neck, and just as they both finished this rapid transformation the call boy rapped. Off went my friend. "I shall be back in 7 minutes," she exclaimed, "so do wait, as I have 14 minutes pause then." The dresser caught up her train and her cloak, and followed the great lady to the wings, where I saw her arranging the actress's dress before she went on, and waiting to slip on the cloak and gloves which she was supposed in the play to come off and fetch. A good dresser is a treasure, and that is why most people prefer their own to those provided at the theatres. A propos of knowing exactly how long an actor is on the stage, I may mention that Herbert Waring once invited me to tea in his dressing room. "At what time?" I naturally asked. "I'll inquire from my dresser," was his reply. "I really don't know when I have my longest wait." Accordingly a telegram arrived next day, which said, "Tea 4:25." So at 4:25 I presented myself at the stage door, where Mr. Waring's man was waiting to receive me. Others joined us. A tin tray was spread with a clean towel. As usual, the theatrical china did not match, and the spoons and the seats were insufficient, but the tea and cakes were delicious, and the rough and tumble means of serving them in a star's dressing room only in keeping with the usual arrangements of austere simplicity behind the scenes. "What was the most amusing thing that ever happened to you on the stage?" Mr. Waring looked perplexed. "I haven't the slightest idea. Nothing amusing ever happens. It is the same routine day, alas, after day. The same dressing, undressing, acting, finishing, going gleefully home, and returning next day to begin exactly the same thing over again. I must be a very dull dog, but I cannot ferret out anything amusing from the back annals of a long theatrical career." And up he jumped to slip on his powdered wig, which he had removed to cool his head, and away he ran to entertain his audience. Mr. Waring's amusing experiences, or lack of them, seem very usual in theatrical life. What a delightful man he is, and what a gentleman in all his dealings. He is always loved by the companies with whom he acts, and never makes a failure with his parts. The most important thing in an actress's dressing room is her table, verily a curious sight. It is generally very large, more often than not it is composed of plain deal, daintily dressed up in muslin flouncings over pink or blue calico. There seems to be a particular fashion in this line, probably because the muslin frills can go to the wash, a necessary proviso for anything connected with the theatre. In the middle usually reposes a large looking glass, and as one particular table is in my mind's eye, I will describe it, as it is typical of many, and belonged to a beautiful comic opera actress. The looking glass was ornamented with little muslin frills and tucks, tied with dainty satin bows, on to which were pinned a series of the actress's own photographs. These cabinet portraits formed a perfect garniture. They represented the lady in every conceivable part she had ever played, and were tied together with tiny scarlet ribbons, the foot of one being fixed to the head of the next. The large mirror over the fireplace, for she was a star and had a fireplace, was similarly ornamented, so was the cheval glass. and above the chimney-piece was a complete screen composed of another set of her own photographs from another piece. These had to stand up, so the little red bows which fixed them went from side to side, by which means they stood along the board zigzag fashion, like a miniature screen, without tumbling down. She was not in the least egotistical, it was simply the craze for photographs, which all theatrical folk seem to have, carried a little further than usual, and in her own dressing room she essayed to have her own photographs galore. As she was very pretty, and many of the costumes charming, she showed her good taste. In front of the looking glass was a large pincushion stuffed with a multiplication of pins of every shape and size, endless hatpins, safety pins, and little brooches, in fact a supply sufficient to pin everything on to her person that exigency might require. There were large pots of powder, flat tablets of rouge, hare's feet for putting on the rouge, fine black pencils for darkening eyes, blue chalk pencils for lining the lids, wonderful cherry red arrangements for painting cupid lips, for even people with large mouths can by deft artistic treatment be made to appear to have small ones. There were bottles of white liquid for hands and neck, because it is more important, of course, to paint the hands than the face, otherwise they are apt to look appallingly red or dirty behind the footlights. There were 2 barbers' blocks on which stood the wigs for the respective acts, since it is much quicker and less trouble to put on a wig than adjust one's hair, and probably no one, except Mrs. Kendall, has ever gone through an entire theatrical career and only twice donned a wig. Of course there were endless powders, as well as perfumes of every sort and kind. There were hand mirrors, and threefold mirrors, and electric light that could be moved about, for it is important to look well from all sides when trotting about the stage. Theatrical dressing-rooms are so small that the dressing table is their chief feature, and if there be room for a sofa or armchair, they are accounted luxurious. All the costumes, as a rule, are hung against the wall, which is first covered with a calico sheet, then each dress is hung on its own peg, over which other calico sheets fall. This does not crush them, keeps all clean, and avoids creases. Nevertheless, the most brilliant theatrical costumes look like a series of melancholy ghosts when not in use. One of the actress's most important possessions is the grease paint box, which in tin, separated into compartments for paints, costs about 10 and 6d. Into these little compartments she puts vaseline, cocoa butter, nuclei, mucilin, and macine for cleaning the skin, for the face has to be washed, so to speak, with grease, preparatory to being made up. A fair woman first lays on a layer of grease paint of a cream ground. On to that she puts light carmine on her cheeks, and follows the lines of her own colour as much as she can. Some people have colour high up on the cheekbones, others low down, and it is as well to follow this natural tint if possible. She blue pencils round her eyes to enhance their size, gets the blue well into the corners and down a little at the outside edges to enlarge those orbs. Then she powders her face all over to get rid of that look of grease which is so distressing, and soften down the general make-up, and then proceeds to darken her eyelashes and eyebrows. One little actress told me she always wound a piece of cotton round a hairpin, onto which she put a blob of cosmetic, heated it in the gas or candle, and when it was melted blinked her eyelashes up and down upon it, so that they might take on the black without getting it in hard lumps, but as a level surface. She put a little red blob in the corner of her eyes to give brightness, and a red line in the nostrils to do away with the black cavern-like appearance caused by the strong lights of the stage. "I never make up the lips full size," she said, "or else they look enormous from the front. I put on very bright little cupid's bows middles, which gives all the effect that is necessary. After I have powdered my face and practically finished it, I just dust on a little dry rouge with a hare's foot to get the exact amount of colour I wish for each act. Grease paints are absolutely necessary to get the make-up to stay on one's face, but they have to be well powdered down, or they will wear greasy. I always think the hands are so important," I remarked. "Oh yes," she replied, "of course for common parts, such as servants, One leaves one's hands to look red, for the footlights always make them look a dirty red. But for aristocratic ladies we have to whiten our hands, arms, and neck, and I make a mixture of my own of glycerine and chalk, because it is so much cheaper than buying it ready made. Sometimes it takes me an hour to make up my face. You see, a large nose can be modified, and a small nose can be made bigger by rouging it up the sides and leaving a strong white line down the middle. It is wonderful how one can alter one's face with paint, though I think it is better to make up too little than too much. Thus it will be seen an hour is quite a usual length of time for an actress to sit in front of her dressing table preparatory to the performance. Mrs. Langtry's dressing room at the Imperial Theatre may be mentioned. An enormous mirror is fastened against one wall, and round it, in the shape of a Norman arc, are 3 rows of electric lights, giving different colour effects. The plain glass is to dress by in the ordinary way. Pink tones give sunset and evening effect, while the third is a curious smoked arrangement to simulate moonlight or dawn. Dresses can be chosen and the face painted accordingly to suit the stage colouring of the scene. The lights turn on above, below, or at the sides, so the effect can be studied from every point of view. While on the subject of making up, a piece of advice from the great actor Jefferson to the wonderful American actress Clara Morris is of interest. Be guided as far as possible by nature. When you make up your face you get powder on your eyelashes. Nature made them dark, so you are free to touch the lashes themselves with ink or pomade, but you should not paint a great band about your eye, with a long line added at the corner to rob it of expression. And now as to the beauty this lining is supposed to bring. Some night, when you have time, I want you to try a little experiment. Make up your face carefully, darken your brows and the lashes of one eye. As to the other eye, you must load the lashes with black pomade, then draw a black line beneath the eye, and a broad line on its upper lid, and a final line out from one corner. The result will be an added lustre to the made-up eye and a seeming gain in brilliancy. But now, watching your reflection all the time, move slowly backwards from the glass, and an odd thing will happen. That made-up eye will gradually grow smaller and will gradually look like a black hole, absolutely without expression. Clara Morris followed Jefferson's counsel and never blued or blacked her eyes again. I once paid an interesting visit to a dressing room. It came about in this wise. In 1898 the Jubilee of Queen's College in Harley Street was celebrated. It was founded 50 years previously as the first college open to women. A booklet in commemoration of the event was got up, and many old girls were persuaded to relate their experiences. Among them were Miss Sophia Jacks Blake, M.D., Miss Dorothea Beale, of Cheltenham, Miss Adeline Sargent, the novelist, Miss Louisa Twining, whose work on pauperism and workhouses is well known, Miss Mary Wardle, the founder of the Convalescent Home, etc. Mrs. Tree agreed to write an article on the stage as a profession for women. At the last moment, when all the other contributions had gone to press, hers was not amongst them. It was a matinee day, and as editor I went down to Her Majesty's and bearded the delinquent in her dressing room. She was nearly ready for the performance, in the midst of her profession, so to speak, but realizing the necessity of doing the work at once or not at all, she seized some half sheets of paper, and between her appearances on the stage jotted down an excellent article. It was clever, to the point, and full of learning. It appeared a few days later, and some critic was unkind enough to say her husband or some other man had written it for her. I refute the charge, for I myself saw it hastily sketched in with a pencil at odd moments on odd scraps of paper. Mrs. Tree is a woman who would have succeeded in many walks of life, for she is enthusiastic and thorough, a combination which triumphantly surmounts difficulties. She has a strong personality. In the old Queen's College days she used to wear long aesthetic gowns and hair cut short. Bunches of flowers generally adorned her waist, offerings from admiring young students whom she guided through the intricacies of Latin or mathematics. The Beerbohm Trees have a charming, old-fashioned house at Chiswick, and 3 daughters of various and diverse ages, for the eldest is grown up, while the youngest is quite small. Both parents are devoted to reading and fond of society, but their life is one long rush. Books from authors line their shelves, etchings and sketches from artists cover their walls. Both have great taste with a keen appreciation of genius. Few people realise what an unusually clever couple the Beerbohm Trees are, or how versatile are their talents. They fly backwards and forwards to the theatre in motor cars, and pretend they like it, in spite of midnight wind and rain. Theatrical work means too much work or none. It is a great strain to play 8 times a week, to dress 8 times at each performance, as in a Drury Lane drama, and to rehearse a new play or give a matinee performance as well. And yet this has to be done when the work is there, for what one refuses, dozens are waiting eagerly to take. Far more actors and actresses are resting every evening than are employed in theatres, poor souls. Resting. That word is a nightmare to men and women on the stage. It means dismissal, it means weary waiting, often actual want, yet it is called resting. It spells days of unrest, days of dreary anxiety and longing, days when the unfortunate actor is too proud to beg for work, too proud even to own temporary defeat, which nevertheless is there. A long run of luck, the enjoyment of many months, perhaps years, when all looked bright and sunny, when money was plentiful and success seemed assured, suddenly stops. There is no suitable part available, new blood is wanted in the theatre, and the older hands must go. Then comes that cruelly enforced rest, and, alas, more often than not, nothing has been laid by for the rainy day, when £10 a week ceases even to reach 10 shillings. Expenses cannot easily be curtailed. Home and family are there. The actor hopes every week for new work, he refuses to retrench, but lives on that miserable farce, keeping up appearances, which, although sometimes good policy, frequently spells ruin in the end. Some of the best actors and actresses of the day are forced into this unfortunate position. Indeed, they suffer more than the smaller fry, for each theatre requires only 1 or 2 stars in its firmament. Theatrical folk are sometimes inclined to be foolish and refuse to play a small part for small pay, because they think it beneath their dignity, so they prefer to starve on their own mistaken grandeur, which is, alas, nothing more nor less than unhappy pride. Clara Morris, one of America's best known actresses, shows the possible horrors, almost starvation, of an actress's early years in her delightful volume Life on the Stage. She nearly died from want of food, and after years and years of work all over the States, made her first appearance as leading lady at Daly's Theatre in New York, at a salary of $35 a week, starting with only $2, 8 shillings, in her pocket. Her first triumph she discussed with her mother and her dog over a supper of bread and cheese. She had attained success, but even then it was months and months, almost years, before she earned enough money either to live in comfort or to be warmly clothed. The beautiful Mary Anderson, in her introduction to the volume, says: "I trust this work will help to stem the tide of girls who so blindly rush into a profession of which they are ignorant, for which they are unfitted, and in which dangers unnumbered lurk on all sides. If with Clara Morris's power and charm so much had to be suffered, what is, what must be, the lot of so many mediocrities who pass through the same fires to receive no reward in the end? Everyone who knows the stage knows what weary suffering is endured daily by would-be actors who are resting, and as they grow older that resting process comes more often, for, as one of the greatest dramatists of the day said to me lately, the stage is only for the young and beautiful. They can claim positions and salaries which experience and talent are unable to keep. By the time youth has thoroughly learned its art, it is no longer physically attractive, and is relegated to the shelf. That seems very hard. Ah, but it is true. At the best, the theatrical is a poor profession, and ends soon. Believe me, it is only good for handsome young men and lovely girls. When the bloom of youth has gone, good acting does not command the salary given to beautiful inexperience." How cruelly said! Perhaps, but truth is often said. When a girl comes to me and says she has had an offer of marriage, but she doesn't want to give up her art, I reply, "Marry the man before your art gives you up." This was severe, but I have often thought over the subject since, and seen how true were the words of that man who knew. Half a century ago only a few favoured professionals were admitted into the sacred circle called society, and then only on rare occasions. But all that is now changed. Actors and actresses are the fashion, and may be found everywhere and anywhere. Their position is remarkable, and they appear to enjoy society as much as society enjoys them. They are fêted and feasted, the world worships at their feet. In London the position of an actor or actress of talent is a brilliant one socially. Chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Piotr. How does a man get on the stage? How does a man get on the stage? Is a question so continually asked that the mode of procedure, at any rate for comic opera, may prove of interest. After application, the would-be actor-singer, if lucky, receives a card saying there will be a "voice trial" for some forthcoming musical comedy at the theatre on such a date at 2 o'clock. Managements that have a number of touring companies arrange voice trials regularly once a week, but others organize them only when necessary. Let us take a case of special trial for some new production. There are usually so many persons anxious to procure employment that 3 days are devoted to these trials, from 2 till 7 o'clock. Upon receiving a card, the would-be artist proceeds to his destination in a state of wild excitement and overpowering nervousness at 1:45, having, in the greenness of inexperience, arranged to meet a friend at 3 o'clock, expecting by then to be able to tell him he has been engaged. On arriving at the corner of the street, the youth is surprised to see a seething mass of struggling humanity striving to get near the stage door, something like a gallery entrance on a first night. At this spectacle his nervousness increases, for he has a vague fear that some of these voices and dramatic powers may be better than his own. During the wait outside, people recognize and hail friends whom they have played with in other companies on tour, or met on the concert platform, or perhaps known in a London theatre. Everyone tries to look jaunty and gay, none would care to acknowledge the cruel anxiety they are enduring, or own how much depends on an engagement. After half an hour, or probably an hour's wait, the keen young man reaches the stage door and finally gets into the passage. In his eagerness he fancies he sees space in that passage to slip past a number of people who are waiting round the doorkeeper's room, and congratulates himself on his smartness in circumnavigating them. Somehow he contrives to get through, and finally runs gaily down a flight of stairs to find himself, not on the stage as he had hoped, but underneath it. A piano and voice are heard overhead. Quickly retracing his steps, he mounts higher and higher in his anxiety to be an early performer, tries passage after passage to find nothing but dressing-rooms, until he arrives breathless at the top of the building opposite 2 large apartments relegated later to the chorus. Utterly bewildered by the intricacies of the theatre, and the sound of music which he cannot locate, the poor novice is almost in despair of reaching the stage at all. One more effort, and a man who looks like a carpenter remarks, "This 'ere is the fly, sir, there's the stage," and he points down below over some strange scaffolding. The singer looks. Lo, there are 50 or 60 people on the stage. And those people? All trying for a job, sir, but, bless your 'eart, not 1 in 20 will get anything. This sounds cheerless to the stage beginner, whose only recommendation is a good, well-trained voice. With directions from the carpenter, he wends his way down again, not with the same elastic step with which he bounded up the stairs. "Bless your heart, not 1 in 20 will get anything," was not a pleasant piece of news. Ah, here is a glass door through which, oh joy, he sees the stage at last. He is about to enter gaily, when he is stopped by a theatre official who demands his "form." "Form? What form? I have none." "Go back to the stage door, sign your name and address there, and fill in the printed form you will get there," says this gentleman in stentorian tones that cause the poor youth to tremble, while he inquires, "Where is the stage door?" Up those stairs, first to the right and second to the left. Back he goes, and after another wait, during which he notes many others filling in forms one by one, and asking endless questions, he gets the book, signs his name, and receives a form, in which he enters name, voice, previous experience, height, and age. There is also a column headed "Remarks," which the would-be actor feels inclined to fill with superlative adjectives, but is informed that "the stage manager fills in this column himself." At last he is on the stage, and after all the ladies have sung, and some of the men, his name is called, and he steps breezily down to the footlights. Ere he reaches them, however, someone to his left says, "Where is your music?" and someone else, to his right, says, "Where is your form?" He hands the form to a person seated at a table, and turning round sees a very ancient upright piano, where he gives his music to the accompanist. Then comes a trying moment. The youth has specifically chosen a song with a long introduction, so as to allow time to compose himself. But that introduction is omitted, for the accompanist, in a most inconsiderate manner, starts 2 bars from the end of it and says, "Now then, please, if you're ready." The singer gets through half a verse when he is suddenly stopped by, "Sing a scale, please." He sings an octave, and is about to exhibit his beautiful tenor notes, when he is again interrupted by the question, "How low can you go?" He climbs down, and with some difficulty manages an A. "Is that as deep as you can get?" "Yes, but I'm a tenor. Shall I sing my high notes?" A voice from the front calls out, "Your name?" All this is abruptly disconcerting, and the lad peers into Cimmerian darkness. In the stalls he sees 2 ghost-like figures, as in a glass dimly. These are the manager and the composer of the new piece, while a few rows behind, 2 or 3 more spirits may be noted flitting restlessly about in the light thrown from the stage. "Mr. A," again says that voice from the front. "Yes, sir." "Did you say you were a tenor?" "Yes." "Ah, I'm afraid we've just chosen the last one wanted. We had a voice trial yesterday, you know," and the tone sounded a dismissal. "May I not sing the last verse of my song?" The young fellow almost gasps. "If you like." He does like, and the 2 figures in front lean over in conversation, but he thinks he detects a friendly nod. "Have we your address?" asks one of them. "Yes, sir, I left it at the stage door." "Thank you. We'll communicate with you should we require your services." The tenor is about to murmur his thanks when another voice from the side of the stage calls, "Mr. Johns, please," and he hurries off, hearing the same questions from the 2 attendant spirits, "Where is your form?" "Where is your music?" addressed to the newcomer. Just as he reaches the door he hears Mr. Johns stopped after 3 bars with, "Thank you, that will do. Mr. Smith, please." This is balm to his soul. After all, he was not hurried off so quickly, and he passes out into the light of day with the "Where is your form? Where is your music? Bless your heart, not 1 in 20 will get anything," still rings in his ears. And so to tea, with what appetite he may bring at 6:45 instead of 3 o'clock as arranged. 10 weary days pass. He receives no letter, hears nothing. He has almost given up all hope of that small but certain income, when a typewritten missive arrives. "Kindly attend rehearsal at the Theatre on Tuesday night at 12 o'clock." The words swim before his eyes. Can it be true? Can he be among the successful ones after all? He is so excited he is scarcely able to eat or sleep, waiting for Tuesday to come. It does come at last, and he sets out for the theatre, thinking he will not betray further ignorance, and arrives fashionably late at 1:45. This time he sees no signs of life at the stage door. "Of course, now that I belong to the theatre, I must go in through the front of the house, not at the side entrance," he says to himself. Round therefore he goes to the front, when someone sitting at the box office asks, "What can I do for you?"
"Nothing, thanks. I'm going to rehearsal." "You're late. The chorus have started nearly an hour." "Good chance here to make an impression." "Chorus! I'm a principal." "This is not quite true at the moment, but may be in a year or two." "Principal? Then you're too early, sir. Principals won't be called for another 3 weeks." The tenor slinks out and goes round to the stage door again, where "You're very late, sir," is the doorkeeper's greeting. "I should advise you to hurry up. They started some time ago. You'll find them up in the saloon, on to the stage, straight to the front of the house, and up to the back of the circle." He goes down on the stage, where he finds the same old piano going, and someone sitting in the stalls, watching a girl in a blouse and flaming red petticoat, who is dancing, whilst 3 or 4 other girls, in various coloured petticoats, none wearing skirts, are waiting their turn. In the distance he hears sounds of singing, which make the most unpleasant discord with the dance tune on the stage. The accompanist points to an iron door at the side, passing through which the youth finds himself outside another door leading to the stalls, and guided by his ear finally reaches the saloon. He enters unobserved, to find it filled with some 40 girls and men, standing or sitting about, and singing from printed copies of something. Sitting down, he looks over his neighbour's shoulder, and notices that each copy has printed on it "Proof copy, private." After half an hour, the stage manager, who has been standing near the piano, says: "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, that will do. Back in an hour, please. Is Mr. A here?" And Mr. A replies "Yes," and is told to wait, and asked why he did not answer to his name before. "I was a little late, I fear." "Don't be late again, or I shall have to fine you." Off he goes to luncheon, and returns with the rest, who, after a further 3 hours' work, are dismissed for the day. This goes on for 6 hours a day during a fortnight, when the chorus is joined by 8 more ladies and gentlemen styled small part people, who, however, consider themselves very great people all the same. Next, the young man is told that in 2 days everyone must be able to sing without music, as rehearsals will commence on the stage. In due course comes the first rehearsal on the stage, and after a couple of days, position, gestures, and business are all taken up in turn. The saloon is then used by the principals, who have now turned up, and in the intervals of rest the chorus can hear sounds of music floating towards them. In another week the principals join the company on the stage and are told their places, while all principals read from their parts at first, such being the etiquette even if they know their lines. Books are soon discarded, however, and rehearsals grow rapidly longer, while everything shows signs of active progress towards production. Scenery and properties begin to be on view, and everyone is sent to be measured for costumes, wigs, and boots. Then comes the first orchestral rehearsal, and finally, a week before the production, night rehearsals start in addition to day, so that people positively live in the theatre from 11:30 in the morning till 11:30 at night or later. Apart from all the general rehearsals, there are 3 rehearsals before or after these, for the dances. There are generally 2 or 3 semi-dress rehearsals, followed by full dress rehearsal on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, or sometimes 7 in the evening, when all the reserved seats are filled with friends of the management or company, various professionals connected in any way with the stage, and a number of artists and journalists making sketches for the papers. At the end of each act the curtain is rung up, and flashlight photographs taken of the effective situation and the finale. And so, at last, the curtain rises on the first night. 9 weeks' rehearsal were given for a comic opera lately, and no one was paid for his or her services during all that time. It only ran for 6 weeks, when the salaries ceased. In comic opera there are such constant changes of dialogue, songs, and alterations, that the company have a general rehearsal at least once a fortnight on the average, right through the run of a piece, and there is always an entire understudying company ready to go at any moment. End of section 16. Chapter 17 of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Piotr. A Girl in the Provinces. It is continually being asked, why do women crowd the stage?
The answer is a simple one, because men fail to provide for them. If every man, willing and able to maintain a wife, married, there would still be over 1,000,000 women left. Many women besides these superfluous ones will never marry. Many husbands will die and leave their widows penniless, and therefore several millions of women in Great Britain must work to live. Their parents bring them into the world, but they do not always give them the means of livelihood. Marriage with love is entering a heaven with one's eyes shut, but marriage without love is entering hell with them open. What then? Women must work until men learn to protect and provide for, not only their wives, but their mothers, daughters and sisters. All men should respect the woman toiler who prefers work to starvation, as all must deplore the necessity that forces her into such a position. Women of gentle blood are the greatest sufferers. Brought up in luxury, they are often thrust on the world to starve through no fault of their own whatever. The middle class father should also be obliged to make some provision by insurance for every baby girl, which will enable her to live and give her at least the necessities of life, so that she may not be driven to sell herself to a husband or die of starvation. The sons can work for themselves, and might have a less expensive upbringing, so that the daughters may be provided for by insurance, if the tragedies of womanhood now enacted on every side are to cease. It is no good for young men to shriek at the invasion of the labour market by women. The young men must deny themselves a little and provide for their womenfolk if it is to be otherwise. It is no good grinding down the wages of women workers, for that does harm to men and women alike, and only benefits the employer. Women must work as things are, and women do work in spite of physical drawbacks, in spite of political handicap, in spite, too often, of lack of sound education. The unfortunate part is that women work for less pay than men, under far harder conditions, and the very men who abuse them for competing on their own ground are the men who do not raise a hand to make provision for their own womenfolk, or try in any way to help the present disastrous condition of affairs. Men can stop this overcrowding of every profession by women if they really try, and until they do so they should cease to resent a state of affairs which they themselves have brought about. Luckily there is hardly any trade or profession closed to women to-day. They cannot be soldiers, sailors, firemen, policemen, barristers, judges, or clergymen in England, but they can be nearly everything else. Even now, in these so-called enlightened days, men often leave what money they have to their sons and let chance look after their daughters. They leave their daughters 4 alternatives: to starve, to live on the bitter bread of charity, to marry, or to work. Independent means is a heritage that seldom falls to the lot of women. There are too many women on the stage as there are too many women everywhere else, but on the stage, as in authorship, women are at least fairly treated as regards salary, and can earn, and do earn, just as much as men. The provinces are the school of actors and actresses, so let us now turn to a provincial company, for after all the really hard work of theatrical life is most severely felt in the provinces. A pathetic little account of early struggles appeared lately from the pen of Miss Florence St. John. At 14 years of age she sang with a diorama along the south coast, and a few months after she married. Her parents were so angry they would have nothing more to do with her, and not long afterwards her husband's health failed and he died. Sheer want pursued her during those days. My efforts to secure work seemed almost hopeless. This is the crux of so many theatrical lives. Those 8 words so often appear, and yet there are sanguine people who imagine employment can always be obtained on the stage for the mere asking, which is not so. But let us now follow the fortunes of a lucky one. After a play has been sufficiently coached in London, at the last rehearsal a call is put up on the board which says, "Train call. All artists are to be at station at o'clock on such and such a date. Train arrives at at o'clock." When the actors reach the station they find compartments engaged for them, it being seldom necessary nowadays to charter a private train. Those compartments are labelled in large lettering with the name of the play for which they have been secured. The party travel third class, the manager as a rule reserving first class compartments for himself and the stars. Generally the others go in twos and twos, according to their rank in the theatre, that is to say, the first and second lady travel together, the third and fourth, and so on. Often the men play cards during the whole journey. Generally the women knit, read, or enliven the hours of weary travel by making tea and talk. At each of the stations where the train pauses, people look into the carriages in a most unblushing manner, taking a good stare at the theatrical folk as if they were wild beasts at the zoo instead of human beings. Sometimes also they make personal and uncomplimentary remarks, such as, "Well, she ain't pretty a bit," or "My, don't she look different hof and hon." Each actress has two supplies of luggage, one of which, namely a theatrical basket, contains her stage dresses, and the other the personal belongings which she will require at her lodgings. As a rule, ere leaving London she is given two sets of labels to place on her effects, so that the baggageman may know where to take her trunks and save her all further trouble. Naturally, theatrical folk must travel on Sunday. On a fit-up tour, when they arrive at the station of the town in which they are to play, each woman collects her own private property, and those who can afford the expense drive off in a cab, while the others, by far the more numerous, deposit it in the left luggage office. After securing a room, the tired traveller returns to the station and employs a porter to deliver her belongings. Sometimes a girl experiences great difficulty in finding a suitable temporary abode, for although in large towns a list of lodgings can be procured, in smaller places no such help is available, and she may have to trudge from street to street to obtain a decent room at a cheap rate. By the time what is wanted is found, she generally feels so weary she is only too thankful to share whatever the lady may chance to have in the way of food, instead of going out and procuring the same for herself. On a theatre tour, the members of a company nearly always engage their rooms beforehand, and order dinner in advance, because they can go on to recognised theatrical lodgings, a list of which may be procured by applying to the Actors' Association, an excellent institution which helps and protects theatrical folk in many ways. When rooms can be arranged beforehand, life becomes easier, but this is not always possible, and then poor wandering mummers meet with disagreeable experiences, such as finding themselves in undesirable lodgings, or at the tender mercy of a landlady who is too fond of intoxicants. A liberal use of insect powder is necessary in smaller towns. A girl friend who decided to go on the stage has given me some valuable information gathered during 6 or 7 years' experience of provincial theatrical life. Hers are the experiences of the novice, and bear out Mrs. Kendall's advice in an earlier chapter. She was not quite dependent on her profession, having small means, but for which she says she must have starved many a time during her novitiate. "One comes across various types of landladies," she explained, "but they are nearly always good-natured, otherwise they would never put up with the erratic hours for meals and the late return of their lodgers. Some of them have been actresses themselves in the olden days, but, having married, they desire to lead a respectable life, by which remark they wish one to understand that the would-be lodger is not considered respectable so long as she remains in the theatrical profession. They are sometimes very amusing, at others the reminiscences of their own experiences prove a little trying, but after all, even such folk are better than the type of lodging housekeeper who has come down in the world and is always referring to her 'better days.' A great many of these people do not appear ever to have had better days. Now and then, however, one finds a genuine case, and receives every possible attention, being made happy with flowers, a real luxury when on tour, nice table linen, fresh towels, all things done in a civilized manner, and, oh dear, what a joy it is to come across such a home." "Are the rooms then generally very bare?" I asked. "One never finds any luxuries. As a rule one has to be content with horsehair covered chairs and sofas, woolen antimacassars, wax or bead flowers under glass cases, often with the addition of a stuffed parrot brought home by some favourite sailor son. But simplicity does not matter at all, so long as the lodgings do not smell stuffy. The bedroom furniture generally consists of the barest necessaries, and if one's couch have springs or a soft mattress, it proves indeed a delightful surprise. There is a terrible type of landlady who rushes one for a large bill just at the last moment. As a rule the account should be brought up on Saturday night and settled, but this sort of woman generally manages to put off producing hers until the last moment on Sunday morning, when one's luggage is probably on its way to the station. Then she brings forth a document which takes all the joy out of life, and sends the unhappy lodger off without a penny in her pocket. Arguing is not of the slightest use, and if one happens to be a woman, as in my case, she has to pay what is demanded, rather than risk a scene. My friend's experiences were so practical I asked her many questions, in reply to some of which she continued: "I have always managed to share expenses with someone I knew, which arrangement, besides being less lonely, reduces the cost considerably. But even then there is a terrible sameness about one's food. An egg for breakfast is very general, as some ladies even object to cooking a rasher of bacon. Jam and other delicacies are beyond our means. Everlasting chop or steak with potatoes for dinner. One never sees a joint. It is not possible, unless a slice can be begged from the landlady, in which case one often has to pay dearly for the luxury. We generally have supper after we return from the theatre, from which we often have to walk home a mile or more after changing. Many landladies refuse to cook anything hot at night, in which case tinned tongue or potted meat suffice. But a hot meal, though consisting only of a little piece of fish or poached egg, is such a joy when one comes home tired and worn out, that it is worth a struggle to try to obtain. The least a bill ever comes to in a week is 15 shillings, and that after studying economy in every way possible. Even though two of us lived together, I never succeeded in reducing my share below that." "What is the usual day?" "One has breakfast as a rule between 10 and 11. Earlier, of course, if a rehearsal has been called for 11, in which case 10 minutes grace is given for the difference in local clocks. Anyone late after that time gets sharply reprimanded by the manager. After rehearsal on tour, a walk till 2 or 3, a little shopping, dinner at 4:30, a rest, a cup of tea at 6:30, after which meal one again proceeds to the theatre, home about 11:30, supper, and bed. Week in, week out, it is pretty much the same. For the first 4 years I only earned a guinea a week, and as it was necessary for me to find all my own costumes for the different parts in the companies in which I played, I had to visit second-hand shops and buy ladies' cast-off ball dresses and things of that sort, although cheap materials and my sewing machine managed to supply me with day garments. It is extraordinary what wonderful effects one can get over the footlights with a dress which by daylight looks absolutely filthy and tawdry, provided it be well cut. That is why it is advisable to buy good second-hand clothes when possible. In my own theatre basket I have 14 complete costumes, and with these I can go on any ordinary tour. I travelled for some time with a girl who, though well born, had out of her miserable guinea a week to help members of her family at home. She was an excellent needlewoman, and used to send her sewing machine with her basket to the theatre, where she sat nearly all day making clothes or cutting them out for other members of the company. By these means she earned a few extra shillings a week, which helped towards the expenses of her kinsfolk. She was a nice girl, but delicate, and I always felt she ought to have had all the fresh air possible, instead of bending over a sewing machine in a stuffy little dressing room. Of course it is necessary for us to take great care of our private clothes, and in order to save them I generally keep an old skirt for trudging backwards and forwards through the dust and dirt, and for rehearsals, since at some of the ill-kept provincial theatres a good gown would be ruined in a few days. Added to which, one often gets soaked on the way to and from the theatre, for we can rarely afford cabs, and even if we could, on a wet night the audience takes all available vehicles, so that by the time the performers are ready to leave, not one is to be procured. Perhaps it may be well to say a little more concerning the theatre basket. It looks like a large washing basket, but being made of wicker work is light. It is lined inside with mackintosh, and bears the name of the company to which it belongs on the outside. It is taken to the theatre on Sunday when the party arrives in the town, and as a rule each actress goes first thing on Monday morning for rehearsal and to unpack. The ordinary provincial company usually comprises about 5 men and 5 women, but in important dramas there are many more, and sometimes a dozen women and girls will have to dress in one room. Of course the principal actresses select the best dressing rooms, and each chooses according to her rank. Round the wall of the room a table is fastened, such a table as one might find in a dairy, under which the dress baskets stand. Those who can afford it provide their own looking glass and toilet cover to put over their scrap of table, also sheets to cover the dirty walls, ere hanging up their skirts. But as everyone cannot afford to pay for the washing of such luxuries, many have to dispense with them. There is seldom a green room in the provinces, so as a rule the actresses sit upon their own baskets during the waits, and as in many theatres there are no fireplaces in these little dressing rooms, and not always artificial heat, there they remain huddled in shawls waiting their call. The most interesting form of company, said my friend, is the repertoire, for that will probably give 3 different pieces a week, which is much more lively than performing in the same play every night for months. If anyone falls out of the cast through illness or any other reason, and a new man or woman join the company, a fortnight is required for rehearsals, and during that fortnight we unfortunate players have to give our gratuitous services every day for some hours. On asking her whether she thought it wise for a girl to choose the stage as a profession, she shook her head sadly. I do not think a woman should ever choose the stage as a profession if she have any person depending upon her, for it is practically impossible to live on one's precarious earnings. It is only the lucky few who can ever hope to make a regular income, and certainly in the provinces very few of us do even that. Many managers like to engage husbands and wives for their company, as this means a joint salary and a saving in consequence. These married couples do not generally get on well, and certainly fail to impress one with the bliss of professional wedded life. "What are the chances of success?" I inquired. The chances of getting on at all on the stage are small in these days, when advancement means one must either have influence at headquarters or be able to bring grist to the manager's mill. It is heartbreaking for those who feel they could succeed, if they were but given a chance, to see less talented but more influential sisters pushed into positions. One gradually loses all hope of true merit finding its own reward, while it is no uncommon thing for a girl to pay down £20 to be allowed to play a certain part. She may be utterly unfitted for the rôle, but £20 is not to be scoffed at, and she is therefore pitchforked into it to succeed or fail. In most cases she fails, and cannot get another engagement unless she produces a second £20. No, I do not consider the stage a good profession for a girl, simply because there is no authority over her, and few people take enough interest in the young creature to ever warn her of the peril. In the theatrical profession, and especially on tour, the sexes meet on an equal footing. No chivalry need be expected, and is certainly rarely received, because when one is vouchsafed any little attention or politeness, such as one would naturally claim in society or take for granted in daily intercourse, it is merely because the man has some natural instinct which causes him to be polite in spite of adverse circumstances. The majority of men upon the stage to-day are so-called gentlemen, but there is something in the life which does not conduce to keep them up to the standard from which they start. They become careless in their manners, dress, and conversation, and keep their best side for the audience. As a rule they are kind-hearted and willing to help women, but men upon the stage get petty. I do not know whether it is the effect of the paint, the powder, and the clothes, or the fact of their doing nothing all day, but they certainly deteriorate. One sees the decadence month by month. They begin by being keen on sport, for instance. But gradually they find even moving their bicycles about an expense and leave them behind. They have nowhere to go, are not even temporary members of clubs, so gradually get into the habit of staying in bed till 12 or even 2 o'clock for lack of something to interest them, and finish the rest of the day in a gin crawl, which simply means sitting in public houses drinking and smoking. Unfortunately this love of drink sometimes increases, and as alcohol can be readily procured by the dresser, men and women too, feeling exhausted, often take things which had better be avoided. You see their meals are not sufficiently substantial. How can they be on the salary paid? Girls live on small rations of bread, butter, and oceans of tea, and the men on endless sausage rolls and mugs of beer. This reminds me of a little chat I had with E.C. Willard. On the 50th night of that excellent play, The Cardinal, by Lewis and Parker, at the St. James's Theatre, a mutual friend came to ask me to pay a visit behind the stage to the great Mr. Willard. We arrived in Mr. Alexander's sitting room described elsewhere, at the end of the third act, and a moment later the rustling silk of the Cardinal's robe was heard in the passage. "I am afraid this is unkind of me," I said. "After that great scene you deserve a whisky and soda instead of a woman and talk." "Not at all," said this splendid looking ecclesiastic, seating himself daily. "I never take anything of that sort till my work is done." "But you must be fearfully exhausted after such a big scene." "No, it is the 8th performance this week, and the 2nd to day, but I am not really tired, and love my work, although I do enjoy my Sunday's rest." Mr. Willard looks handsomer off the stage than on. His strong face seems to have a kindlier smile, his manner to be even more courtly, and I was particularly struck with the fact that he wore little or no make-up. "You are an Englishman," I said, "and yet you have deserted your native land for America?" "Not so. I am English, of course, though I love America," was the reply. "7 years ago I went across the Atlantic and was successful. Then I had a terrible illness which lasted 3 years. When I was better I did not dare start afresh in England and risk failure, so I began again in the States, where I was sure of the dollars. They have been so kind to me over there that I do not now like to leave them. You see America is so enormous, the constant influx of emigrants so great, one can go on playing the same piece for years and years, as Jefferson is still doing in Rip Van Winkle. Here new plays are constantly wanted, and even if an actor is an old favourite, he cannot drag a poor play to success. Management in London has become a risky matter, expenses are enormous, and a few failures mean ruin. Alas! at that moment the wretched little bell which heralds a new act rang forth, and I barely had time to reach the box before Mr. Willard was once more upon the stage, continuing his masterly performance. He is an actor of strong personality, and can ill be spared from England's shores. But to return to the provinces and the experiences of the pretty little actress. "The familiarity which necessarily exists between the sexes," continued she, "both in acting together at night and rehearsing together by day, is in itself a danger to some girls who are unfortunate enough to be thrown into close companionship with unprincipled men, and have not sufficient worldly wisdom or instinct to guard against their advances. The idea of the stage door being besieged by admirers is far from true in the provinces. With musical comedies of rather a low order, there may be a certain amount of hanging about after the performance, but in the case of an ordinary company this rarely happens. The real danger in the provinces does not come from outside. Life on tour for a single man is anything but agreeable. He has no one to look after his clothes, for, needless to say, no landlady will do that, and therefore both his theatre outfit and his private garments are always getting torn and worn. As a rule, however, there are capable women in the company who are willing to sew on buttons, mend or darn, and if it were not for their good nature, many men would find themselves in sorry plight. She was an intelligent, clever girl, and I asked her how she got on the stage. After having been trained under a well-known manager for 6 months, and paying him 30 guineas for his services, I was offered an engagement in one of his companies, then starting for a fit-up tour throughout Scotland at £1 a week. payable in 2 instalments, namely 10 shillings on Wednesday and 10 shillings on Saturday. Fortunately, being a costume play, dresses were provided, but I had to buy tights, grease paint, sandals, and various ornaments, give 2 weeks' rehearsals in London free, play for 3 nights and live for 3 days in Scotland before I received even the first 10 shillings. Happily I was the proud possessor of small means, and shared my rooms and everything with a girl friend who had trained at the same time as myself, consequently we managed with great care to make both ends meet, but it was hard work for us even with my little extra money, and what girls do who have to live entirely on their pay, and put by something for the time when they are out of an engagement, a time which often comes, I do not pretend to know. A fit-up tour is admittedly the most expensive kind of work for actors, because it means that 3 nights is the longest period one ever remains in any town, most of the time being booked for one-night places only. On this particular tour of 16 weeks there were no less than 60 one-night places, and my total salary amounted to £16. It may sound ridiculous to travel with a dog, but mine proved of the greatest use for me on more than one occasion. Our first hunt was always for rooms. The term sounds grand, but the rooms generally consisted of one chamber with a bed sunk into the wall, as they are to-day at a great public school like Harrow. To get to this abode we sometimes had to pass through the family apartments, a most embarrassing proceeding, as the members had generally retired to rest before our return from the theatre, but still beggars cannot be choosers, and in some ways we often felt ourselves in that position. Supposing we arrived at a one-night place, we would sally forth and buy £1/4 tea, £1/4 butter, 1 small loaf, half-pound steak or chop for dinner, 2 eggs for breakfast. The landlady's charge, as a rule, for 2 lodgers sharing expenses varied from 2 shillings 6d. to 3 shillings for a single night, or 5 shillings for 3 nights, so that the one-night business was terribly extravagant. Being our first tour, we were greatly interested by the novelty of everything. It was this novelty and excitement which carried us through. We really needed to be sharp and quick, for in that particular play we had to change our apparel no less than 6 times. We were Roman ladies, slaves, and Christians intermittently during the evening, being among those massacred in the second act and resuscitated to be eaten by lions at the end of the play. Therefore, while the audience were moved to tears, picturing us being devoured by roaring beasts, we were ourselves roaring in the wings in imitation of those bloodthirsty animals. A fit-up carries all its own scenery, and nearly always goes to small towns which have no theatre, only a town hall or corn exchange, while the dressing rooms, especially in the latter, are often extremely funny, being like little stalls in a stable, where we sometimes found corn on the floor and could look over at each other like horses in their stalls. The fit-up takes its own carpenter, who generally plays 2 or 3 parts during the evening. He has to make the stage fit the scenery, or vice versa, and get everything into working order for the evening performance. On one occasion we arrived at a little town in Scotland and started off on our usual hunt for rooms. We were growing tired and depressed, time was creeping on, and if we did not obtain a meal and rooms soon, we knew we should have to go to the theatre hungry, and spend that night in the wings. Matters were really getting desperate when we met 2 other members of the company in similar plight. One of them was boldly courageous, however, and when we saw a clergyman coming towards us, suggested she should ask him if he knew of any likely place. She did so, and he very kindly told her to mention his name at an inn where he was sure they would, if possible, put her and her friend up, but he added, "There is only 1 room." This, of course, did not help my friend and myself, so after the 2 had started off, we stood wondering what was to become of us. "Can you not tell us of any other place?" we asked. No, he could not, but at this moment a lady appeared on the scene who asked what we wanted. We explained the difficulty of our situation, and she pondered and thought, but intimated there was no lodging she could recommend, whereupon we proceeded disconsolatedly on our way, not in the least knowing what we were to do. A moment or 2 afterwards we heard some one running behind. It was the clergyman. Taking off his hat, and almost breathless, he exclaimed, "My wife wishes to speak to you." And lo and behold, that dear wife hurried after him to say she felt so sorry for the position in which we were placed, that she would be very glad if my friend and I would give her the pleasure of our company and stay at her house for the night. We went. She sent from the vicarage to the station for our belongings, and we could not have been more kindly treated if we had been her dearest friends. She had a fire lighted in our bedroom, and there were lovely flowers on the table when we returned from the theatre. They took us for a charming expedition to some old ruins on the following morning, invited friends to meet us at luncheon, and although they did not go to the theatre themselves at night, they set up for us and had a delightful little supper prepared against our return. I shall never forget the great kindness they showed us. I am sure there are very few people who would be tempted to proffer such courtesy and hospitality to two wandering actresses. And yet, if they only knew how warmly their goodness was appreciated, and how beneficent its influence proved, they would feel well repaid. In the afternoon, when it was time to leave, rain was pouring down, but that fact did not deter the clergyman from accompanying us to the station, carrying an umbrella in one hand and a bag in the other, while his little son followed with a great bunch of flowers. As if to take us down after such luxurious quarters, we fell upon evil days at the very next town, where we were told it was difficult to get accommodation at all, and therefore made up our minds to take the first we met. It did not look inviting, but the woman said that by the time we had done our shopping she would have everything clean and straight. We bought our little necessaries, and as the door was opened by a small boy, handed them in to him, saying we were going for a walk, but would be back in less than an hour for tea. On our return we were admitted, but saw no signs of tea, so rang a bell. No one came. We waited 10 minutes and rang again. A pause. Suddenly the door was burst open, and in reeled the landlady, who banged down a jug of boiling water on the table and departed. We gazed at each other in utter consternation, feeling very much frightened, for we both realized she was drunk. We rang again after a time, but as no one attempted to answer our summons, and it being impossible to make a meal of hot water, I crept forth to reconnoitre. There was not a soul to be seen, not even the little boy, but I ventured into the kitchen to try if I could not find the bread, butter, and tea, so that we might prepare something to eat for ourselves. While so engaged, a sonorous sound made me turn round, and there, upon the floor, with her head resting upon a chair in the corner of the room, lay our landlady, dead drunk. It was an appalling sight. We gathered our things together as quickly as we could, and determined to leave, put a shilling on the table to appease the good woman's wrath when she awoke, and were glad to shake the dust of her home from our feet. Not far off was a temperance hotel, the sight of which, after our recent experience, we hailed with delight, and where we engaged a bedroom, to which we repaired when our evening's work was finished. My dog, who always lay at the foot of my bed, woke us in the middle of the night by his low growls. He seemed much perturbed, so we lay and listened. The cause of his anxiety soon became clear. Someone was trying to turn the handle of the door, while the voices of two men could be heard distinctly, one of which said, "Only two actresses, go on," and then the door handle turned again and his friend was pushed in. It was all dark, but at that moment my dog's growls and barks became so furious and angry, as he sprang from the bed, that the men precipitately departed, and we were left in peace, although too nervous to sleep. Of course we complained next morning, but equally of course the landlady knew nothing about the matter. These were our best and worst experiences during my first tour. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Piotr. Perils of the stage. Mankind curses bad luck, but seldom blesses good fate. It is comparatively easy to make a reputation once given a start by kindly fate, but extremely difficult to maintain one in any walk of life. and this applies particularly to the stage. Happening to meet a very pretty girl who had made quite a hit in the provinces, and was longing for a London engagement, I asked her what her experience of theatrical agents had been. "Perfectly horrible," she replied, "and heart-breaking into the bargain. For 3 whole months I have been daily to a certain office, and in all this weary time I have only had 5 interviews with the manager. Is it so difficult to get work? It is almost impossible. When I arrive the little stuffy office is more or less crowded. There are women seeking engagements for the music halls, fat, common, vulgar women who laugh loud and make coarse jokes. There are sickly young men who want to play lovers' parts on the legitimate stage, and who, according to the actor's habit, never take their hats off. It is a strange fact that actors invariably rehearse in hats or caps, and sit in them on all occasions, like Jews in synagogues. There are children who come alone and wait about daily for an engagement, children who have been employed in the pantomime and whose parents are more or less dependent on their gains. And there is one girl, she is between 13 and 14, whom I have met there every day for weeks and weeks. 74 days after the pantomime closed, she was still without work, and I watched that child get thinner and paler time by time, as she told me with tears in her eyes she was the sole support of a sick mother. When I go there, the gentleman who has the office makes me shrivel up. "Do you specialize?" he asks, peeping over the edge of his gold-rimmed spectacles. He jots down my replies on a sheet of paper. "Character or juvenile parts?" he inquires. "What salary? Whom have you played with?" And having made these and other inquiries, he looks through a series of books, turns over the pages, says, "I'm sorry, I have nothing for you today, you might look in again tomorrow." And this same farce or tragedy is repeated every time. "But is it worth while going?" I asked. "Hardly. One wears out one's shoe leather and one's temper. And yet, after all, the theatrical agent is practically my only chance of an engagement. This man is all right. He is not a bogus agent, but he simply has 100 applicants for every single post he has to fill." She went back day after day and week after week, and each time the same scene was enacted, but no engagement came of it. Finally, brought to the verge of starvation, she had to accept work again in the provinces, and so desert an invalid father. She happened to be a lady, but of course many applicants for histrionic fame ought to be kitchen maids or laundry maids. They have no qualifications whatever to any higher walk of life. Below is an original letter showing the kind of person who wants to go on the stage. It was sent to one of our best known actresses when she was starring with her own company. Castle, October 19th, 1897. "Dear Madam, I writ you these few lines to see if you would have an opening for me as I would be an actor on the stage, for my whole thought and life is on the stage, and when I have any time you will always find me reading at some play. I make a nice female as I have a very soft voice, dear Madam. I hope you will not refuse me, I have got no friends alive to keep me back, and everyone tells me that you would make the best teacher that I could get. Dear lady, I again ask you not to refuse me. I will go on whatever terms you think best. I have been up at the theatre 4 times seeing you. I enclose my card to let you see it. Please to send it back again, and I enclose 12 stamps to you to telegraph by return if you would like to see me, or if you would like to come down to the castle to see me, no more at present, but remains your obedient servant, Peter W." This was a letter from a man with aspirations, and below is a letter from Mrs. Siddons. If this actress, whose position was probably the grandest and greatest of any woman on the stage, can express such sentiments, what must be the experience of less successful players? Mrs. Siddons presents her compliments to Miss Goldsmith, and takes the liberty to inform her that although herself she has enjoyed all the advantages arising from holding the first situation in the drama, yet that those advantages have been so counterbalanced by anxiety and mortification that she long ago resolved never to be accessory to bringing anyone into so precarious and so arduous a profession. The deterrent words of Mrs. Siddons had little effect in her day, just as the deterrent words of those at the top of the profession have little effect now. Consequently, not only does the honest agent flourish, but the bogus agent and bogus manager grow rich on the credulity of young men and women. Speaking of the bogus manager, Sir Henry Irving observed: "The actor's art is thought to be so easy, in fact many people deny it is an art at all, and so many writers persistently assert no preparation is needed for a career upon the stage, that it is little wonder deluded people only find out too late that acting, as Voltaire said, is one of the most rare and difficult of arts. The allurements, too, held forth by unscrupulous persons, who draw money from foolish folk under the pretence of obtaining lucrative engagements for them, help to swell very greatly the list of unfortunate dupes. I hope that these matters may in time claim the attention of serious-minded persons, for the increasing number of theatrical applicants for charity, young persons, too, is little less than alarming." This remark of Sir Henry's is hardly surprising when below is a specimen application received by the manager of a London suburban theatre from a female farm servant in Essex: "Dear Sir, I works hon a farm, but wants to turn actin. Would lick engagements for the pantomime in hany ways which you think I be fit for. I sings in the church choir and plays the melodeon. I wants to change my work for the stage, as I'm sick of farm work. 'Is last tatter liftin' nae finished me." Another was written in an almost illegible hand which ran: "Honoured Sir, I wants to go on the stage as I am a servant, and my master says I am a good smart maid, so I would like to play act maids' parts, until I can do ladies. I don't mind wages for a bit, as I like your actin'. I'd like to act in your theatre, so I'm going to call soon." Truly the assurance of people is amazing. To imagine they can enter the theatrical profession without even common education is absurd. Only lately another stage-struck servant appeared in the courts. Although an honest girl, she was tempted to steal from her mistress to pay £3 7 to an agent for a problematic theatrical engagement. She is only one of many. One day a woman stood before a manager. She had been so persistent for days in her desire to see him, and appeared so remarkable, that the stage doorkeeper at last inquired if he might admit her. "Please, sir, I wants to be an actress," she began on entering the manager's room. "Do you? And what qualifications have you?" "I am a cook." "That, my good woman, will hardly help you on the stage." "And I've been to the theatres with my young man. I am keeping company with 'im, you know, and..." "Well, well?" "And 'e and I thinks you ain't got the right tone of hactress for them parts. Now I am a real cook, I am, and I don't wear them immoral 'igh 'eels and tiny waists. I dresses respectable, I do, and I'd just give the right style to the piece. My pal, she's a parlour maid, she is, could do duchesses and them like. She's the air, she 'as. But I ain't ambitious. I'd just like to be what I am, and show people 'ow a real cook should be played. Lor bless you, sir, I don't cook in diamond rings." That manager did not engage the lady, but he learned a lesson in realism, which resulted in Miss Fitzclare being asked to dispense with her rings on the stage that night. With a parting nod, the lady said as she left the door: "Your young man don't make love proper neither. You should just see 'ow 'Arry makes love, you should. He'd make you all sit up, I know. He does it that beautiful, he do. Your man's an 'arf-'earted bloke, 'e is. Seems afraid of the girl. Perhaps it's 'er 'igh 'eels and diamonds 'e's afraid of, eh?" The lady took herself off. These are only a few instances to show how all sorts and conditions of people are stage-struck. The delightful man Sir Walter Besant laid down an excellent rule for young authors: never pay to produce a book. It spells ruin to the aspirant. The same may be said of the stage. Never part with money to get on the stage. It may be advisable to accept a little if one cannot get much, but never, never to pay for a footing. Services will be accepted while given free or paid for, and dispensed with when the time comes for payment to be received. Among the many temptations of stage life is drink. The actor feels a little below par, he has a great scene before him, and while waiting in his dressing room for the call boy, he flies to a glass of whisky or champagne. He gets through the trying ordeal, comes off the boards excited and streaming at every pore, flings himself into a chair, and during the time his dresser is dragging him out of his clothes or rubbing him down, yields to the temptation of another glass. Many of our actors are most abstemious, though more than one prominent star has been known to mumble incoherently on the stage. Matinee days are always a strain for everyone in the theatre, and there are people foolish enough to think a little stimulant will enable them to get through, not knowing a continuance of forced strength spells damnation. Yes, the stage is surrounded by temptations. Morally, extravagantly, and alcoholically the webs of excess are ready to engulf the unwary, and therefore, when people keep straight, run fair, and save their pennies, they are to be congratulated and deserve the approbation of mankind. He who has never been tempted is not a hero in comparison with the man who has turned aside from the enticing wiles of sin. There is a certain class of woman who continually appears in the police courts described as an actress, and is generally up before the magistrate or judge for being drunk and disorderly, suing her husband or someone else for maintenance, or claiming to have some grievance for a breach of promise or lost jewellery. These ladies often describe themselves as actresses, and perhaps they sometimes are, but if so they are no honour to their profession. There is another stamp of woman who becomes an actress by persuading some weak man to run a theatre for her. Sympathy between men and women is often dangerous. She generally ends by ruining him, and he in running away from her. These bogus actresses, with their motor cars and diamonds, are more dangerous and certainly more attractive than the bogus manager. They are the vultures who suck young men's blood. They are the flashy, showy women who attract silly servant girls with the idea the stage spells wealth and success, but they are the scourge of the profession. Good and charming women are to be found upon the stage. Virtue usually triumphs. They are happy in their home life, devoted to their children, sympathetic to their friends, and generous almost to a fault. The leading actresses are, generally speaking, not only the best exponents of their art, but the best women too. The flash and dash come to the police courts, and end their days in the workhouse. The stage at best means very, very hard work, and theatrical success is only fleeting in most cases. It must be seized upon when caught and treated as a fickle jade, because money and popularity both take wings and fly away sooner than expected. In all professions men and women quickly reach their zenith, and if they are clever may hold that position for 10 years. After that decline is inevitable, and more rapid than the ascent has been. If a reputation is to be made, it is generally achieved by either man or woman before the age of 40. By 50 the summit of fame is reached, and the downward grade begun. One can observe this again and again in every profession. A great actor, doctor, lawyer, writer, or painter has 10 years of success, and if he does not provide for his future during those 10 years, 'tis sad for him. As the tide turns on the shore, so the tide turns on the careers of men and women alike. Public life is not necessarily bad. In the first place, it is only the man with strong individuality who can ever attain publicity. He must be above the ordinary ruck and gamut, or he will never receive public recognition. If, therefore, he is stronger than his brother, he should be stronger also to resist temptation, to disdain self-love or vainglory. The moment his life becomes public he is under the microscope, and should remember his influence is great for good or ill. Public praise is pleasant, but after all it means little. One's own conscience is the thing. That alone tells whether we have given of our best or reached our ideal. The true artist is never satisfied, therefore the true artist never suffers from a swelled head. It is the minor fry who enjoy that ailment. The temptations behind the footlights are enormous. It is useless denying the fact. One may love the stage, and count many actors and actresses among one's friends, but one cannot help seeing that theatrical life is beset by dangers and pitfalls. Young men and women alike are run after and fawned upon by foolish people of both sexes. Morally this is bad. Actors are flattered and worshipped as though they were little gods. This in itself tends to evoke egotism. The gorgeous apparel of the theatre makes men and women extravagant in their dress. The constant going backwards and forwards in all weathers inclines them to think they must save time or themselves by driving. The fear of catching cold makes them indulge in cabs and carriages they cannot afford, and extravagance becomes their besetting sin. Everyone wants to look more prosperous than his neighbour. Every recipient of 40 shillings a week wishes the world to think his salary is £40. Apart from pay, the life is exacting. The leaders of the profession seldom sup out. They are tired after the evening's work, and know that burning the candle at both ends means early extinction, but the Toti Veris and Gladys Fitzglynns are always ready to be entertained. The following advertisement appeared one day in a leading London newspaper: Stage. I am nearly 18, tall, fair, good looking, have a little money, and wish to adopt the stage as a profession. Engagement wanted. What was the result? Piles of letters containing all sorts of offers to help Miss A to her doom. A certain gentleman wrote from a well-known fashionable club, the letter being marked private, saying: I should like, if possible, to assist you in your desire to go on the stage, but I am not professional myself in any way. This is purely a matter in which I might be happy to take an interest and assist, if you think it proper to communicate with me by letter, stating exactly the circumstances, and when I can have an interview with you on the subject. This letter might be capable of many interpretations. The gentleman might, of course, have been purely philanthropic in his motives. We will give him the benefit of the doubt. Others were yet more strange and suggestive of peril for the girl of 18. What might have been the end of all this? Supposing Miss A had granted an interview to No. 1, supposing further he had advanced the money for the novice to buy an engagement, what might have proved her fate? She would have been in his clutches, young, inexperienced, powerless, in the hands of a man who, if really philanthropic, could easily have found persons needing interest and assistance among his own immediate surroundings, instead of going wide afield to dispense his charity and selecting for the purpose an unknown girl of 18, who innocently stated she was good looking. Miss Geneviève Ward, a woman who has climbed to the top of her profession, allows me to tell the following little story about herself as a warning to others, for it was only her own genius, a very rare gift, which dragged her to the front. When she first came to England, with a name already well established in America, expecting an immediate engagement, she could not get work at all. She applied to the best known theatrical agents in London. Day after day she went there, she, a woman in her prime, at the top of her profession, and yet she was unable to obtain work. "Tragedy is dead, Miss Ward," exclaimed Mr. B. . "Young women with fine physical developments are what we want." It was not talent, not experience, that were required, according to this well-known agent, but legs and arms, a poor standard, truly, for the drama of the country. However, at last there came a day, after many weary months of waiting, when someone was wanted to play tragedy at Manchester. It was only a 12 weeks' engagement, and the pay but £8 a week. It was a ridiculous sum for one in Miss Ward's position to accept, but she was worn out with anxiety, and determined not to go back to America and own herself vanquished. Therefore she accepted the offer, paid the agent heavily, and went to Manchester, where she played for 12 weeks as arranged. Before many nights had passed, however, she had signed a further engagement at double the pay. Her chance in England had come, and she had won. If such delay, such misery, such anxiety can befall those whose position is already established and whose talents are known, what must await the novice? "I suppose I have kept more girls off the stage than any living woman," says Miss Ward. "Short, ugly, fat, common, hopeless girls come to me to ask my advice. There is not 1 in 20 who has the slightest chance, not the very slightest chance, of success. Servants come, dressmakers, wives of military men, daughters of bishops and titled folk. The mania seems to spread from high to low. and yet hardly one of them has a voice, figure, carriage, or anything suitable for the stage, even setting dramatic talent aside. What do you say to them? Tell them right out. I think it is kinder to them and more generous to the drama. Mind you, I say, I am telling you this for your own good. If I consulted personal profit, I should take you as a pupil and fill my pocket with your guineas. But you are hopeless. Nothing could possibly make you succeed with such a temperament, or voice, or size, or whatever it may be. So you had better turn your attention at once to some other occupation. I have known several cases in which Miss Ward had been most kind by helping real talent gratuitously. Many of the women on the stage today owe their position to her timely aid. Warn girls," she continued, "when asked for a bonus, never, never to give one. It is no uncommon thing for a bogus agent to ask for a £10 bonus, and promise to secure an engagement for £1 a week. That engagement is never procured, or if it be, lasts only during rehearsals, which are not paid for, or for a couple of weeks, after which the girl is told she does not suit the part and dismissed. Thus the matter ends so far as a triumphal stage entry is concerned. It may be well here to give an actual case of bonus as an example. A wretched girl signed an agreement to the following effect. She was to pay £20 down to the agent as a fee, to provide her own dresses and travelling expenses, and to play the first 4 months without any salary at all. At the expiration of that time she was to receive 10 shillings a week for 6 months, with an increase of £1 a week for the following year. On that munificent want of salary the girl was expected to pay rent, dress well for the stage, have good food so as to be able to fulfil her engagements properly, attend endless rehearsals, and withal consider herself fortunate in obtaining a hearing at all. She broke the engagement on excellent advice, and the agent wisely did not take action against her, as he at first threatened to do. In the 60's, Edward Terry essayed the stage. Seeing an advertisement, the future comedian offered his services at a salary of 15 shillings a week. Above the door was announced in grand style, "Madame Castillon's Dramatic Company, taking advantage of the closing of the theatres Royal Covent Garden, Drury Lane, Lyceum, etc., will appear at Christchurch for 6 nights only." It was an extraordinary company, in which several parts were acted by one person during the same evening. There was only one play book, from which every actor copied out his own part. No one was ever paid, and general chaos reigned. Edward Terry had fallen into the hands of one of the most notorious bogus managers of his time. His next engagement was more lucrative. He was always sure of playing 18 parts a week, and sometimes received 20 shillings in return. Matters are better now, but strange stories of early struggle crop up occasionally, and the bogus manager agent, in spite of the Actors' Association and the Benevolent Fund, still exists. Edward Terry had to fight hard in order to attain a position, and thoroughly deserves all the success that has fallen to his lot, but all stage aspirants are not Edward Terrys, and then their plight in the hands of the bogus agent is sad indeed, especially in the provinces where he flourishes. Those who know the stage only from the front of the house little realise the strict regulations enforced behind the scenes in our first-class London theatres, the discipline of which is almost as severe as that of a government office. Each theatre has its code of rules and regulations, which generally number about 20, but are sometimes so lengthy they are embodied in a handbook. These rules and regulations have to be signed by everyone, from principal to super, and run somewhat in this wise. The hair of the face must be shaven if required by the exigencies of the play represented. All engagements to be regarded as exclusive, and no artist shall appear at any other theatre or hall without the consent in writing of the manager or his representative. All artists engaged are to play any part or parts for which they may be cast, or to understudy if required. In the event of the theatre being closed through riot, fire, public calamity, royal demise, epidemic, or illness of principal, no salary shall be claimed during such closing. A clause in a comic opera agreement ran: No salary will be payable for any nights or days on which the artist may not perform, whether absenting himself by permission, or through illness, or any other unavoidable cause, and should the artist be absent for more than 12 consecutive performances under any circumstances whatever, this engagement may be cancelled by the manager without any notice whatsoever. Thus it will be seen an engagement even when obtained hangs on a slender thread, and 12 days' illness, although an understudy may step in to take the part, threatens dismissal for the unfortunate sufferer. Of course culpable negligence of the rules may be punished by instant dismissal, but for ordinary offences fines are levied, in proportion to the salary of the offender. Sometimes a fine is 6d., sometimes a guinea, but an ordinary one is half a crown, for talking behind the scenes during a performance. Some people are always being fined. In the case of legitimate drama, the actor is not permitted to build up his part at his own sweet will. In comic opera, however, gagging and business have often gone far to make success. The upholder of law and order behind the scenes is the stage manager. If power gives happiness, he should be happy, but his position is such a delicate one, and tact so essential, that it is often difficult for him to be friendly with everyone and yet a strict and impartial disciplinarian. Life is a strange affair. We all try to be alike in our youth, and individual in our middle age. As we grow up we endeavour to shake ourselves out of that jelly mould shape into which school education forces us, although we sometimes mistake eccentricity for individuality. Just as much real joy comes to the woman who has darned a stocking neatly, or served a good dinner, as is vouchsafed by public praise. Just as much pleasure is felt by the man who has helped a friend or steered a successful bargain. In the well-doing is the satisfaction, not in indiscriminate and oftentimes over-eulogistic applause. Stage aspirants soon learn those glorious press notices count for naught, and they cease to bring a flutter to the heart. Success is but a bubble, it glistens and attracts the world as the soap globe glistens and attracts the child. It is something to strive for, something to catch, something to run after and grasp securely. Yet, after all, what is it? It is but a shimmer. The bubble bursts in the child's hand, the glistening particles are nothing, the ball once gained is gone. Is not success the same? We long for, we strive to attain our goal, and then find nothing but emptiness. If we are not satisfied with ourselves, if we know our best work has not yet been attained, that we have not yet reached our own high standard, worldly success has merely pricked the bubble of ambition, that bubble we had thought meant so much and which really is so little. People are a queer riddle. One might liken them to flowers. There are the beautiful roses, the stately lilies, the prickly thorns and clinging creepers. There are the weeds and poisonous garbage. Society is the same. People represent flowers. Some live long and do evil, some live a short while and do good, sweetening all around them by the beauty of their minds. Our friends are like the blooms in a bouquet, our enemies like the weeds in our path. What diversified people we like! This woman excites our admiration because she is beautiful, that one because she is clever, yon lady is sympathetic, and the trend of the mind of the fourth stimulates our own. They are absolutely dissimilar, that quartet, we like them all, and yet they have no points in common. It does us good to be with some people, they have an ennobling, refining, or softening effect upon us, it does us harm to be with others. And so we are all many people in one. We adapt ourselves to our friends as we adapt our clothes to the weather. We expand in their sunshine and frizzle up in their sarcasm. We are all actors. All our life is merely human drama, and imperceptibly to ourselves we play many parts, and yet imagine during that long vista of years and circumstances we are always the same. We act, you and I, but we act ourselves, and the professional player acts someone else, but that is the only difference, and it is less than most folk imagine. Love of the stage is the fascination of the mysterious, which is the most insidious of all fascinations. Chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Piotr. Chorus Girl number 2 on the left. A fantasy founded on fact. The curtain had just risen. The orchestra was playing the music of the famous operetta Penso, when a man in the prime of life, in a handsome fur coat, entered the stalls. He was alone. Having paid for his programme and taken off his furs, he quietly sat down to survey the scene. The chorus was upon the stage. Sweeping his glasses from end to end of the line of girls upon the boards, his eyes suddenly lighted upon the second girl on the left. She was not beautiful. She had a pretty figure and a most expressive face, but her features were irregular and her mouth was large. Far more lovely girls stood in that row, many taller, with finely chiselled features and elegant figures, but only that girl, number 2 on the left, caught and riveted his attention. He looked and looked again. What charm did she possess, he wondered, which seemed to draw him towards her? She was singing and making little curtsies, like the others, in time to the music. She was waving her arms with those automatic gesticulations the chorus learn. She was smiling, and yet behind it all he seemed to see an unutterable sadness in the depths of her dark grey eyes. The girl fascinated him. He listened not to the music of Penso, he hardly looked at anyone else. So long as number 2 on the left remained upon the stage, his entire thoughts were with her. She enchained, she almost seemed to hypnotize him, and yet she seldom looked his way. During the entr'acte, Alan Murray went outside to try and discover the name of number 2 on the left. No one, however, was able to tell him, or if they were, they would not. Disappointed, he returned to his seat in time for the second act. She had changed her dress, and the new one was perhaps less becoming than the first. "She is not pretty," he kept repeating to himself, "but she is young. She is neither a great singer nor a dancer, but she is a gentlewoman." So great was the fascination she had exerted over the man of the world, that he returned the next night to a seat in the stalls, and as he gazed upon the operetta, he felt more than ever convinced that there was some great tragedy lying hidden behind the smiling face of number 2 on the left. He desired to unravel it. A short time before Christmas, being absolutely determined to find out who she was, he succeeded in worming the information from someone behind the scenes. Her real name was Sarah Hopper. Could anything be more hideous? Her professional one was Alwyn Fitzclare. Could anything be more euphonious? He went off to his club after one of the performances was over and wrote her a note. Days went by and he received no answer. Then he purchased some beautiful flowers and sent them to the stage door for Miss Alwyn Fitzclare with his compliments. Still no answer, but in the meantime he had been back to the theatre, and had been even more struck than before with the appearance of the girl, and felt sorry for the look of distress he thought he saw lurking behind her smiles. It was now 2 days before Christmas, and writing her a note begging her not to take it amiss from a stranger who wished her a very pleasant Christmas, he enclosed 2 5-pound notes, hoping she would drink his health and remember she had given great pleasure to one of her audience. Christmas morning brought him back the 2 notes with a formal stiff little letter, saying that Miss Fitzclare begged to return her thanks and was quite unable to accept gifts from a stranger. For weeks and weeks he occupied a stall at the theatre, whenever he had an off night. He continued to write little notes to Miss Alwyn Fitzclare, but never received any reply. However, at last he ventured to beg that she would grant him an interview. If she would only tell him where she came from, or give him an inkling of her position, he would find some means to obtain a formal introduction. She answered this letter not quite so stiffly as the former one containing the banknotes, and stated that she came from Ipswich. Time passed. He succeeded in gaining an introduction and sent it formally to number 2 on the left. At the same time he invited her to lunch with him at a famous restaurant. She accepted. She came out of curiosity, and ultimately vowed, although in spite of the introduction and in spite of the months of persuasion on his part, she felt doubtful as to the wisdom of doing so. The girl who had looked plain but interesting upon the stage appeared before him in a neat blue serge costume, well fitting and undecorated, and struck Mr. Murray as very much better looking and smarter altogether in the capacity of a private person than she did in the chorus. A gentlewoman was writ big all over her. No one could look at her a second time and not feel that she was well born. "Do you know," she said, "I often have funny letters from people on the other side of the footlights, but yours is the only one I ever answered in my life. Tell me why you have been so persistent." "Because of the trouble in your face," he answered. "In mine? But I am always laughing on the stage. This is part of the duty of the chorus." "Yes," he replied, "you laugh outwardly, but you cry inwardly. It was your sad expression which first attracted my attention." He was very sympathetic and very kind, and gradually she told him her story. Her father had been a solicitor of good birth. He had a large practice, but dying suddenly left a family of 9 children, all under the age of 20, practically unprovided for the small amount for which his life was insured soon dwindled away in meeting the funeral expenses and settling outstanding bills. "I was not clever enough to become a governess," she said. "I had not been educated for a secretary. In fact, I had no talent of any sort or kind except the ability to sing a little. Luck and hard work brought me the chance of being able to earn a guinea a week on the stage, out of which I managed to live and send home a shilling or so to help mother and the children." It was a tragic little story, one of many which a great metropolis can unfold, where men bring children into the world without giving a thought to their future, and leave them to be dragged up on the bitter bread of charity, or to work in that starvation mill which so many well-born gentlewomen grind year after year. The rich gentleman and number 2 on the left became warm friends. Months went by and they often met. She lunched with him sometimes, she spent an occasional Sunday on the river, and she wrote to him, and he to her, on the days when they did not meet. She was very proud. She would accept none of his presents, she would not take money, and was always most circumspect in her behaviour. Gradually that sad look melted away from her eyes, and a certain beauty took its place. He was kind to her, and by degrees, little by little, the interest aroused by her mournful expression deepened, as it disappeared, into love. She, on her side, looked upon him as a true friend, practically the only disinterested friend she had in London. And so time wore on, bringing happiness to both. Neither paused to think. Her life was a happy one. She grew not to mind her work at the theatre, or sewing she did for the children at home. Sitting hour by hour alone in her little attic lodging, looking forward to those pleasant Sunday trips which brought a new joy into her existence. His companionship and friendship were very precious to this lonely girl in London. One glorious hot July Sunday, which they spent near Marlow on Thames, seemed to Sarah Hopper the happiest day of her life. She loved him, and she knew it. He loved her, and had often told her so, but more than that she had never passed between them. It was nearly 2 years since they first met, during which time the only bright hours in the life of number 2 on the left had been those spent in Alan Murray's company. His kindness never changed. His consideration for her seemed to Alwyn delightful. On that sunny afternoon they pulled up under the willows for tea, which she made from a little basket they always took with them. They were sitting chatting pleasantly, watching the waterflies buzzing on the stream, throwing an occasional bit of cake to a swan, and thoroughly enjoying that delightful sense of laziness which comes upon most of us at the close of a hot day, when seated beneath the shady trees that overhang the river. He took her hand and played with it absently for a while. "Little girl," he said at last, "this cannot go on. I love you, and you know it. You love me, and I know that too. But do you love me sufficiently to give yourself to me?" "I don't think I could love you any more," she replied, "however hard I tried, for you have been my good angel for 2 happy years, you have been the one bright star of hope, the one pleasant thing in my life. I love you, I love you, I love you," she murmured as she leaned forward and laid her cheek upon his hand. He felt her warm breath thrill through him. "I know it, dear," he said, and a sad, pained look crossed his face. "But what I want to know is, do you care for me sufficiently?" "I hardly understand," she answered, frightened she knew not why. "Will you give me the right to keep you in luxury and protect you from harm?" She looked up anxiously. There was something in his words and something in his tone she did not comprehend. His face was averted, but she saw how pale and haggard he looked. "What do you mean?" she questioned, turning sick with an inexplicable dread. "Could you give up the stage, the world, for me? Instead of being your friend, I would be your slave." She seemed to be in a dream. His words sounded strange. His halting speech, his ashen hue denoted evil. "Tell me what you mean," she cried. "Dearest," he murmured, and then words seemed to fail him. "But," and she looked him through and through, a terrible suspicion entering her soul, "but," he replied, turning away from her, "you can never be my wife." "Great God!" exclaimed the girl. "This from the one friend I thought I had on earth, from the one man I had learned to love and respect, not your wife!" she repeated. "Am I losing my senses, or are you?" "You cannot be my wife," he reiterated desperately. "So you think I am not good enough?" she gasped almost hysterically. "It is true that I am only number 2 on the left, and yet I was born a lady. I am your equal in social standing, and no breath of scandal has ever soiled my name. You have made love to me for 2 years. You have vowed you love me, and now, when you know my whole heart is given to you, you turn round and coolly say, 'You are not good enough to be my wife.' My darling," he said, taking her hand and squeezing her fingers until the blood seemed to stand still within them, "this is torture to me." "And what do you suppose it is to me?" she retorted. "It is not only torture, but insult. You have brought me to this. I loved you so intensely, and trusted you so implicitly. I never paused to think. I have lived like a blind fool in the present, happy when with you, dreaming of you when away, drifting on, in wild Elysium, hoping, yes, hoping, I suppose, that some day I might be your wife, or if not that, at any rate that I could still continue to respect myself and respect you. To think that you whom I trusted so much, should insult me like this," and she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. "My darling, I cannot marry," he replied. "It is not your position, it is not the stage, it is nothing to do with you that makes me say so. Had it been possible, I should have asked you to be my wife a year ago or more, but little girl, dearest love, how can I tell you?" And almost choking with emotion, he added, "I am a married man." She left his side and staggered to the other end of the boat, where, throwing herself upon the cushions, she wept as if her heart would break. "Have I deserved this?" she cried, "that you, in smiling guise, should come to me as an emblem of happiness? You have stolen my life from me, and oh, you poor, poor wretched wife!" She was a good, honest, womanly girl, and even in her own anguish of heart did not forget she was not the only sufferer from such treachery. In a torrent of words he told her how he had married when a student at the 'Varsity, married beneath him, how his life had ever since been misery, how the pretty girl bride had developed into a vulgar woman, how for years she and her still commoner family had dogged his footsteps, how he had paid and paid to be rid of her, how his whole existence had been ruined by the indiscretion of his youth and the wiles of the designing landlady's daughter, how he had never felt respect and love for woman until he had met her, number 2 on the left. It was a tragic moment in both their lives. He felt the awful sin he had committed in not telling her from the first that he could never marry. He felt the injustice of it all, the punishment for his own folly that had fallen upon him, and she, poor soul, not only realized the shock to her ideal, but the horrible barrier that had risen between them. They travelled up to town together, both silent, each feeling that all the world was changed. They parted at Victoria. She would not let him see her home. The idyll of 2 years was rudely shattered. The happy dreams of life had suddenly turned to miserable reality. He returned to his chambers, where he cursed himself and cursed his luck, as he walked up and down his rooms all night, and realized the root of the misery lay in the deception he had practised. He, whose life had been ruined by the deception of a designing, low-class minx, had himself in his turn committed the self-same sin of misrepresentation. The thought was maddening, his remorse intense, but alack, the past cannot be recalled, and the curse that had followed him for many years he had, alas, cast over a sinless girl. Sarah Hopper returned to her cheap little lodging at Islington, for after 2 years' hard work her salary was still only 30 shillings a week, and throwing herself into an armchair she sat and thought. Her head throbbed as if it would burst, her eyes seemed on fire as she reviewed the whole story from every possible side. She had been a blind fool, she had trusted in a man she believed a good man, the web of fate had entangled her, and this was the end. She could never see him again. By morning she was in a high state of fever, and when the landlady came to her later in the day she was so alarmed at her appearance she sent at once for the doctor. The doctor came. "Mental shock," he said. Days went by, and in wild delirium the little chorus girl lay upon her bed in the lodging, till one night, when the landlady had fallen asleep, the broken-hearted girl managed to scramble up, and getting a piece of paper and an envelope wrote, "You have killed me, but for the sake of the honest love of those 2 years, I forgive you all." She addressed it in a firm hand to Alan Murray, and crawling back into bed fell asleep. A few hours later the landlady awoke. All was silent in the room, so silent, in fact, that she began to wonder. The wild raving had ceased. The restless head was no longer tossing about on the pillow. Drawing back the muslin curtains to let the light of early morning, that soft, gentle light of a summer's day, pour into the room, she went across to the bed. The kindly old woman bent over the broken-hearted girl to find her sleeping peacefully, the sleep of death. End of chapter 19. End of Behind the Footlights by Ethel Tweedie.